Welcome everybody to this next Tech Talk. I see we already have 28, 29 attendees. Please feel free to introduce yourself, please pop us a hello in chat, and let's get going on this next very exciting session of the HM Technologies Tech Talks. Settle in, we're going to get going quite shortly. Hi Aurélie, welcome. Great to see some regular names and faces who've been following us. Alvinesh, great to see you as well. And some folks that were with us in the first round, great to see you back again. As you know, my name is James van der Westhuizen. I am moderating today. Hi, Priscilla from MCB. Fantastic. Welcome. I think you'll find this very interesting. I'm going to be handing over to Parmesh, Owen, and Santosh soon. Before we get going, please remember that we are using an interaction platform for these sessions. So please go to menti.com and pop in the code that you see on screen. You can also just point your mobile device at the screen and it'll open up the interface, and that's going to allow us to ask questions, interact with the speakers, and have a conversation. Ranjit, welcome. Great to see folks from MCB over here. Really right in your wheelhouse, I think, what we're going to be learning today. I've got a very exciting and very relevant discussion for you today. So please check in, get us going on the Mentimeter as well. Code 4938 8133, and you know that you use menti.com. You can open an additional window on your device, or you can just use your mobile phone. And really exciting to have you. I'm going to hand over to Parmesh, who's going to do the introductions for us. Parmesh Balani from HMT, great to have you with us today. He's specifically grown a beard just for your edification for this session to match Owen. He felt that they should both have beards, so a lot of months worth of preparation have gone into it. Santosh, you obviously didn't get the memo, but I'm sure you can catch up.
Unfortunately not, James, but I'll try to live up to it.
Fantastic, fantastic. Folks, I'm going to hand over to Parmesh. I'm going to be monitoring the chat, and we're going to have our panelists talking to you. I really look forward to the session. Parmesh, over to you.
Thanks, James. Well, good day, everyone. And again, thank you for making time for it today. And it's a great pleasure to have you during this session. And just a recap of the last session where we went into, we dive into the digital transformation aspect of businesses. And it was quite exciting to have James and many other participants to be very interactive in the session. And we could say that we took away a lot of things from that session. And on that success path, we are moving now on to our next session, which is right in the midst. We are like in the cyclone. We are in the midst of the cyclone, actually, in the financial services sector, and trying to cope with the global changing dynamics of AML, CFT policies and procedures. And you must be very much aware, so many things are happening globally. It's not only about Mauritius. The US is coming up with their minimal tax plan, and the OECD is facing a lot of pressure from the US, and we in between, being members of OECD, we have to comply. And the session today, it's about compliance. It's about compliance, but more importantly, it's about how we leverage on our human capital at the same time. And that's the only thing that we have now remains in our hands. And our panelists today, Santosh, the MD of Apex Group, and very learned young professional in that domain. And we have Owen, who is the CEO of Hedioko, and you will have the opportunity to understand and also to enjoy the capacity of that technology with a lot of automation and a lot of efficiency which is brought at the table. So I will move on the, you can move it.
Let's do a quick check-in, just see how people are doing, Parmesh. See how folks are doing today, if anybody has any specific concerns. And maybe while we do that, can we ask the panelists maybe just to say hi and introduce themselves as well. We've had a quick introduction. Welcome, Owen. Welcome, Santosh. Great to have you with us.
Thanks, James. Happy to go first. Thank you, Parmesh, for that introduction. Delighted to be part of these tech talks today, and looking forward to a great interactive session with everyone. I think it's a great lineup with the experience that Owen brings globally and Parmesh's local domain expertise in the IT sector. Very happy to chip in from a financial services and an industry player perspective on how we're traveling through this journey. And
I'd like to say hello here from London. And I'm very jealous of all the fine weather you've got. We've got a sunny-ish day here, but and I was also hoping Parmesh was going to introduce me as young and dynamic, but
So folks, I see a lot of people are doing well today. That's fantastic. You have an opportunity to interact all the way. You can also ask us questions, both on the Q&A as well as in Mentimeter all through the process. We're going to have some polls like we always do and some interactions. And it'll be really good to get your comments and your questions. We try to manage them as we go. And we're going to get going with the overview of the presentation. Great to see that by far the biggest consensus is great and really good. Delighted to be here. Wonderful. Fantastic. It's fantastic to share this time with you, and wonderful to see the great interaction we've had so far. So I'm going to hand over to the folks who are going to get into the meat of the presentation now, and please keep your questions coming. I will moderate, and they will be monitoring it as well, so that we keep it as dynamic as possible.
Yeah. Yes, thanks, James. I'll just give you just a brief overview of the agenda. And like I mentioned, it's about coping with these, changing dynamics. And the agenda today would be revolving around policies and procedures already in place, and how the players, the players in the industry has really implemented and gone so, very far with their implementation. How are they tackling the risk-based assessment issue, the monitoring mechanism of their clients, of the investors, of people with whom they're working, and when at the end, in fact, when within the presentation, we'll also at the same time provide us with some insights about how global players can embrace technology, and it will be followed by your question and answers. But in the meantime, like James mentioned, you might have a few questions that you can put up to us, and there will be questions already on the slides as we move on. So just a preamble of the situation. I think everybody knows about it, and we've been on that list since 7th of May 2020. And still, we are not yet there. There are a few things, and there's a second evaluation which is coming in September 2021, which is quite critical for the country. And at the same time, a lot of things have happened down the line. Not only that we need to comply with this, but we need also to take into consideration what is happening globally, our competitors, very harsh competition in that sector, and Mauritius being, the financial services sector contributes a lot to the GDP of the country, and not to take into consideration at the same time the COVID situation, the way you work now, the way things go. So all these things have coming down the line that complicate matters. And one other thing is that I think we only left with 1 out of the 40 recommendation of the FATF, and which is one major recommendation that we need to follow. It's about, especially about the compliance adaptability to the new economic order. So we can move on, James. I can't. Yeah, I can see it. Okay. Oops. Sorry. Yeah. So for this presentation today, it's about giving you an idea about the various aspects of policies and procedures in place. And I would rather pass on the floor to Santosh, maybe. You can take this up from here, Santosh.
With pleasure, Parmesh. I think, look, first of all, we just wanted to maybe gather everyone's viewpoint on these changes, on the permanency of these changes. And I think there is a poll that's running, but as I dive in, it'll be great to just get people's feedback on whether they view these as permanent or they think this will relax and go back to somewhere to the good old days once we are off the gray list. I think just in terms of the changes that we've been forced to bring into effect, a lot of these have been evolutionary. It's not been a radical transformation here. A lot of these concepts have always existed in our laws, our regulations from fairly long time now. However, what you have in place now is a much more stringent implementation of it. I think the direction of travel is fairly clear. As I see the poll indicating, I think everyone seems to be on the same wavelength here. The direction of travel is absolutely crystal clear. These are here to stay, and the implementation is going to be more and more stringent as we go along. If I can just briefly touch on what's expected here, especially focusing on AML CFT. MLRO, DMLRO, and compliance officers mandatory for all activity-based licensees, and much more stringent obligations on them. So I think that's going to be a key area of development, focus, and training for the industry going forward. Element of risk-based customer due diligence approach, and also remedial measures that need to be put in place should there not be sufficient CDD in the manuals and processes of the company. Business risk assessment, whether it's on the business itself and on customers. So here it's not just a pure AML CFT concern, it's actually assessing risk of business and customers that we onboard, and having a much deeper, I think, interaction with clients. As service providers, in particular in the financial services industry, we tend to focus on our own business, which is to service clients, but we also need to focus on the business of our clients, which is a key, I think, change in mindset, as opposed to a process-oriented approach that we've taken to AML CFT. It's also actually substance-oriented in today's world. Ongoing monitoring, the whole, that's a very, I think, again, that goes to the substance of understanding what the client does, monitoring transactions, understanding what they're doing, who are they onboarding, less of a mechanical rote work of collecting passports and utility bills. It's actually understanding the nature of transactions and doing appropriate monitoring as they progress. The next probable angle of appropriate policies and procedures. Again, it's not, this is just to quickly introduce and then get people's feeling, but suspicious transaction reporting become a key, as we would have seen. Even the EU ambassador in yesterday's paper itself reported the lack of STRs as a concern. And I think some of the statistics, there was a recent webinar organized by Finance Mauritius on this, where the ex-head of the FIU was staggering if you look at the lack of STRs that exist in our system. So again, this is a key element of the policies and procedures that all financial institutions need to have in place on a going forward basis. And an equally important one, where I think will be very much a part of what we discussed today, is a record-keeping policy to actually enable reconstruction of transactions. So it's not just a question of trying to prevent it. It's not just a question of doing the appropriate reporting and walking away, but it's also record keeping and reconstruction of transactions. So there is a shift in the approach. What used to be, and again, it's not meant in any sort of it's an evolutionary process. So things will change. And we would used to be a tick the box or a more, process-oriented phase aspect of the business is now become a substantive aspect of the business. And I think this will require a deep interaction between humans and machines to be able to make this work on a going forward basis, which is the purpose of this talk anyway. I'll pause here, Parmesh.
And Santosh, I'd like to add a couple of things to that. Maybe some of them to make you guys feel a little bit better that you're not being victimized out in Mauritius, which is, I remember seeing a paper from the Financial Conduct Authority in the UK about 6 years ago when they were reviewing metal brokers, and equally they made the same point that there was a massive lack of STRs, and a lot of the brokers said that's because our systems are so good, and the FCA went exactly the opposite. The net that you're using is too coarse and everything is falling through. I'd also probably throw another comment on it, which is it's and I think the pandemic has shown this. It's more important to know who we're dealing with than ever nowadays, because actually it's not possible to meet people face to face. It's not feasible to fly, in and explain where your money came from, or discuss your investment strategy with people whilst you're putting money up. And none of us see CRM as a bad thing. It's just, knowing your customer, understanding who it is another level of seeing who our customer is. And maybe what we're trying to do is just tweak the focus. I always say when I started in banking, compliance was two guys in a room without lighting. And the light would come on when you went in to see them to get them to sign something off for you. Whereas, nowadays it's very much front and center, but it's also something where it's very important to think of it as how does it protect me and my business. It's not just about seeing a customer as a pile of cash to get more of that cash off. It's about how do I protect me and the business from the bad customers, not from customers, from the bad customers.
Yeah. I think, James, you've got a poll here on the...
Yeah, so we seem to have almost complete consensus that this is the new normal, that we're not going back to the pre-assessment time. And I guess that has deep implications for the way that organizations need to structure for a permanent situation of this type of reporting. Folks, for those of you who might have joined us late, we're using mentimeter.com. I've posted the code into chat. You can use it at any time. And we're going to all the way through, we are going to be getting your feedback, getting your questions. You can ask them on the Mentimeter as well. At any time, you can use this code that I'm going to pop into chat again and give us your views. It's really interesting. I think it's already a great direction for the panelists to understand that there is a very strong realization that this is here to stay. I guess that's the message we're getting, Owen.
Yeah, I think we've learned also a lesson. And yeah.
And I apologize for the cat.
We don't see the cat, we just see this blue line across your face. It's like a virtual cat, Owen.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So folks, what is the implication of this new normal for the folks in the room? How does that change their business, their planning, their budgeting? Santosh, Owen, how does it have a long-term impact? If we agree, as per the poll, that this is going to be the way that it is, how's it going to impact on businesses going forward?
Well, let me throw in the first one, which is clearly it's a cost that wasn't there previously. And you know, like anything, you look at a cost as a negative thing. I think we need to be looking at how we gather information about the client. Potentially, it's an upside. Potentially, the more we know about a client, the better we can advise them or discuss. But clearly, it's a cost. And the second part of the challenge is how do you make that cost as small as possible without getting yourself back into another issue. So, you know, everybody sees this as the new normal, but how do you make it the new normal without crippling the business with too much overhead?
Santosh, comments from you before we go to that exact same point, which is the next thing.
Sure. I think, look, cost clearly incredible driver of all considerations in all business decisions. But I think the other aspect from a purely process perspective is actually the efficiency of operations, the efficiency of being able to service clients, the ability to get people onboarded. If you're servicing an investment fund, an investment advisor, helping the client do their job. And very often, if we don't have efficiencies and change the ways we operate because of this new normal, that impacts not only our business, it impacts our clients' business. And that is, in a lot of cases, going to be a very, very quick way of losing business and market share as a jurisdiction, not only from a increasing our costs, but also decreasing the top line, which is even more problematic in some ways.
Yeah. In fact, at some point in time, compliance was like taken for granted in a way. The way that compliance was put in place in many of these players, these many companies, you could see that it was just for the sake of having a compliance division, a compliance unit, a compliance officer, and that's it. And so now the rule of the game has completely changed now.
So I don't know who wants to talk about this in terms of the role of people in compliance, Owen. Maybe just give us a perspective, Santosh, there.
So I think you probably, and there's another slide somewhere in the pack, which I'm sure we'll get to, but I think what a lot of people don't understand is how much time it actually takes to properly onboard somebody. There's been probably since the crypto market appeared 4 or 5 years ago, a whole load of new technologies that have come about, and those new technologies are what I call the thumbs up technology. So they're designed to do the minimum you can get away with, give you at least some form of tick in the box and some, you know, green thumb that tells you that you've done the job properly. But in truth, that was really only ever designed for the crypto market, which was a little bit dubious in nature anyway. It's geographically dispersed, and most crypto organizations have put themselves in the most lenient regulatory regimes you can possibly believe. And therefore, what you find is if you want to properly onboard a person, and again, it depends on how much money they're leaving with you, how much risk they represent to you. It can take anywhere from 30 minutes to the best part of a day if somebody is a significant enough individual. And equally, it can take days to properly onboard a business client, because you've got to know who the directors are, know who the shareholders are, know who the significant individuals within and UBOs. You've got to understand who the parent companies are. You've got to do some checks on the parent companies, probably to the same level that you've done the checks to the individuals. And you can end up going quite a long way up the food chain before you feel comfortable that you know and understand who this customer really is. Now, as I say, I actually think that done well, that should then feed into your sales process and your sales team, so that they've got more information about the client and can maybe pitch better products. But the amount of time that realistically is needed is significant. I'll give you an example. We have a client who is a brokerage business, Japanese-owned brokerage business in London. They employ 5 people in their onboarding team, and they onboard 1,000 customers, corporate customers, and maintain those 1,000 corporate customers a year. So do the maths. You know, it's effectively just doing the life cycle management, because they don't really get many new customers. You know, they've got 1,000 days for keeping 1,000 records up to date. And they would probably like more people, and they are heavily automated because they're one of our customers. So, you know, it is actually quite shocking when you sit there and you work out how long it takes to onboard somebody. And actually what tends to happen is you convince yourself that the time is actually not very much, because let me do the straight through happy day, happy journey, and I've managed to onboard this customer in 15 minutes or 35 minutes. Well, firstly, you won't do that with every single customer, and not every single customer will be a happy journey. You know, you will find that documents are wrong. You'll need to request things. You'll find that things are out of date. And that process can get really convoluted. And if you think in Mauritius, you've moved from a relatively low touch regime to a very high touch regime, the amount of time that you need to put into these has really grown significantly, very painfully, very quickly. Santosh, I'll throw it over to you to.
Yeah, no, 100% agree, though, and I think you've summarized it perfectly in terms of the efficiencies that we need to achieve here. And I'll just add that, you know, what you're seeing today, I think, to James' question, is a very manual process that we have, and then even in our own business as we speak, which is given the brokerage example you've been given, clearly a direction of travel that we would aspire to get to. If you look at today, what's happening is a very human-driven process, which is, I think, it's here to stay. It cannot change. Anything that requires a judgment call will require a human being, and that's just here. We just need the right tools to effect the right judgment, though. And today, the tools are also manual and very prone to be, I think, probably copied and in manners that are not appropriate. And what I mean by that is the traditional go-to method right now is for business risk assessment and customer risk assessment is an Excel, which somebody would have inherited from somewhere. And you're using a weighted average of a certain number of facts. Now, the question is, have these factors been properly evaluated for your own business? For the client's own business, because the risk factors for a broker is very different from the risk factors for a fund. Risk factor for a daily trading fund is very different from a risk factor for a long-term 10+2 private equity fund. The quality of the client base is very different. We shouldn't be subjecting the pension fund of California to the same rigors that we would subject an individual with 36 layers between him and the beneficial owner. So there is a variety of assessments that come in where you don't clearly, we need the human touch is again, just to put it in context here, is just, we just cannot do without that. Now, the question is, how do we get humans to execute the best decision with the best tools available and in a best workflow possible? And again, going back to an earlier point, so that we don't affect top line and bottom line. And I think that's always, compliance today is such a fundamentally important part of business that I think compliance actually can single-handedly damage both top and bottom line. So I think this is something that damage, in not meant in a negative way, but impact rather than damage the top and the bottom line. And this is something that we absolutely need to evolve with. And it's a reality that in Mauritius, hopefully, will start dealing with more efficiently going forward, including personally maybe getting the regulator more comfortable with tools that are not standardized. And it takes an industry very often to lead the way, as opposed to the other way around. Regulators are here to regulate and not lead innovation.
Fantastic. So it looks like the consensus is that about one full employee is what will be needed, according to. Is that your experience to some extent, Santosh, as well? That mostly that's what folks will be dealing with, at least one new appointment, if you look at 40 hours a week?
My personal experience is a bit more. And it tends to be with the type of clientele we deal with. And I think it's also, there's possibly, again, we cannot underestimate the ongoing monitoring requirements. And that takes a lot of effort. You will, it's a very manual process. I don't know if Owen, you feel you have your experience.
No, I would say it is my experience with client after client that the number that gets put on the table at the beginning is a fraction of the number that you end up concluding with them. When you do the analysis and you sit down and you say, well, let's look through. And I think there's also a habit of you hide the amount of time and effort, because actually you find that the people in the team have gone from working a 40-hour week to a 55-hour week. So, you know, you're almost hiding an FTE amongst the overtime, or maybe more than one FTE in the overtime. And whilst that's, you know, you've been under the radar for, you've been under the microscope for a year, you know, whether or not that's a sustainable additional man effort long term. You know, Santosh makes the great comment about it's not just about getting somebody in, it's about the ongoing monitoring of that individual. And, you know, equally, you do not want to be in a situation where, you know, you end up growing the business, but your top line, as that grows, all you're doing is putting people in the business in costs to do monitoring and control and keeping an eye on all the new revenue that's coming in and where it's come from. So actually, you don't see anything trickle down to the bottom line, because the top line goes and the middle swells.
And there's also one thing that Santosh pointed out about the regulators is that there will be a need for alignment, you know, regulators with the new technologies that are coming out, and there might be some major shift that they need to do in terms of considering technologies within these companies, and assess these technologies so that they give some kind like a compliance, you know, certificate to these technologies, saying that, okay, guys, you can use this, and we are behind you. And so there should be some kind like a collaboration among regulators and players at the same time.
And I think we very often forget that the regulator is regulating not one type of business at that moment in time. So, you know, in Santosh's point of view, he's looking at it and going, you know, I'm a wealth manager. I'm managing funds on behalf of other people. You know, why does the regulator not understand how I work? And you go, but actually the regulator is managing people who are trusts, individual investors, retail clients, you know, investment organizations, big corporates. And because of the breadth, it's important that, you know, we can get tools in front of them that they can see the benefit of those tools and go, I'm happy and I'm comfortable. And sometimes it takes a little bit more time and effort to get that happy and comfortable, but it's well worth it when you do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we've established that it's definitely not worth not being compliant, but it is also quite an expensive process. How do we think about this cost benefit around using technology to reduce the operational cost of compliance? What's the big picture here, Owen, Santosh?
Well, I was going to say, I would start off by saying, if you look at the financial market across the world in 2007, 2008, when it was probably at its least managed and worst controlled, what the regulator came out and did is literally fine organizations around the world in the billions. And, I used to work for Reuters at the time. We used to joke that a million was now a billion because, and, if you weren't being fined $1 billion, what's wrong with you? Right. So the nature of the penalty is enormous. I also had it described to me once as your fine is normally 10 times the profits that you've made as a result of weak controls or doing things in the wrong way or letting somebody within the organization not get away with something, or sorry, get away with something rather than not get away with something. So the fine is normally a significant multiple. We see that, well, we saw that also with Standard Chartered. The cost of doing it versus the benefit, for a long time, people have just seen this as a cost must do. And I think that's because actually the way we've solved compliance is, as a colleague of mine says, it's a 19th century form of addressing a 21st century problem, e.g. you just throw people at it and you throw enough people at it and it goes away. But actually we've seen compliance teams around the world appear in the thousands. I think I did some research back about 4 years ago that said about 1 in 20 people in a bank is a compliance role now. As I used to say, when I started off in Deutsche, I hate to think how many people there were, but there were 2 compliance officers sat in a dimly lit room. Now it's 1 policeman in 20, and that is an enormous overhead to bear. And actually, in truth, it's not sustainable. Right? Every industry has to get more efficient and more effective, and you can't afford 1 person in 20 to be a policeman, So what we need to do is to find a way of cutting the cost and automation. And, we typically find when we put technology in that you go through 2 waves. The first wave is cutting out a lot of the manual work and gaining confidence. And that tends to save you anywhere between 20 and 40% of your overhead from the team. And the next stage is to actually increase that on automation, put more and more functionality in, and typically we see that giving you another 30-40% and typically getting you up to somewhere around 70. So there's massive savings to be had by going on this journey. And we've all started off with one of the early slides saying this has happened. This isn't going backwards. We're not going to see this reverse. So there's effectively 2 ways of looking at this. Option 1 is that we just keep throwing people at the problem, or option 2, and I'm sure we'll get to talk about this, is how do you use technology in the right way? And Santos has already hinted about that. Computers do calculations. They work out probabilities. They do balance scorecards. They're able to bring vast amounts of data together, harvest it, and make a mathematical decision. They don't do judgments. It's the people that do the judgment. A computer has never said, I don't know what it is, but this doesn't feel right, or this doesn't smell right. But people build those innate skills. And therefore, I'm not, as an automation person, as somebody who's very focused on AI and machine learning and thinking machines, I don't say that get rid of people and just let the machines do everything. I know where the limits are, but what we need to do is accept that there is money to be taken off our cost base by using technology, and it gives us saving. It also improves the proposition and the saving for the cost for the customer. It reduces the time to onboard them. So there's lots and lots of benefits through this. It's not just about the cost, and it's not just about whilst I don't do CRM, I'm just sat there all the time looking at, what you learn about a customer whilst you're onboarding them. And I just sit there and think, why do the people in sales not use more of this information? Right. So that really is the benefit to be gained ultimately.
Excellent.
No, absolutely, Owen. I would just add one aspect to this, which is, I think Owen has just described this very thoroughly, but I would also not mitigate the cost of criminal proceedings, damage reputations, and sanctioning, right? It's not just about money. And I think I make this point here because a lot of people from compliance departments here, you need to realize that in today's world, and even though it's not been a reality in Mauritius, the average compliance person in Mauritius, in my estimate, and here it's a wild guess, I don't have statistical data to bake this, to give a definite number here, but I would assume that most compliance persons are in the mid-30s to early 40s on average in Mauritius, in our jurisdiction, given the nascency of our own financial services industry, and probably have about 25 to 30-year careers ahead of them. Things going wrong as an MLRO, DMLRO, and compliance officer is not just cost to the company, it's a personal cost, including going to jail. As not to put a too fine point on it, it's not something to be trifled with. I think we all need to be very conscious of the importance of this, and it's a cost that is maybe not in monetary terms, but I think can be even more damaging if we aggregate it over the potential to do damage over a 20 or 30-year period for individuals involved in this area.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point, because one of the things that we normally say to people is, we can show you great cost savings, but actually one of the biggest savings is taking your people away from the most dull, boring job you can imagine, getting through people's paperwork and actually giving them something that is interesting, stimulating, good for the business. Right? It shouldn't be just a case of checking somebody's utility bill and checking their address exists. It's really getting in and understanding that customer and understanding the risks that they present to you, and actually getting rid of a bad customer is a good thing. That might sound counterintuitive, but I'm sure once you think about it, it's not, right? We tend to look at customers as saying, from a money laundering point of view, nobody with a lot of money hasn't laundered some money, right? Might sound very cynical, but if the money's moved from one part of the world to another part of the world and it's a big lump of money, there's some money laundering in that, right? And you're never going to stop that. But you then need to worry about the criminal financing, the counter-terrorism, and the fraud. And therefore, you're protecting yourselves against your bad customers, you're protecting your customers against other bad customers, and you're protecting yourself against people who are trying to use you as a venue for doing bad things. And that's really what your compliance team should be focused on, not just checking that somebody's passport is in date.
Great. Nice, interesting comment there in the Mentimeter. It says it's not just the compliance officer, it's the auditing costs that come with it, which is an additional cost as well, right?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Gent. Let's move on. Talk a little bit about this risk-based assessment around geographies and countries.
So, Santosh, do you want to go first, or shall I pick?
Yeah, sure. I absolutely. Look, this is linked to essentially associating risk with countries subject to financial sanctions, embargoes, or subject to measures. They may be global, as in UN driven and homogeneous, or they may be country specific, such as the OFAC list, or which is US specific, but touches the world because the dollar is the world's currency. And embargoes, measures that are related to terrorism, financing of terrorism, proliferation. I think what you have to look at as you look at the jurisdiction is you have to have access to a database that gives you a risk associated with the level of predicate offenses to money laundering in that particular country, right? So it's information from credible, reliable public sources. You know, what is the level of corruption? What is the level of organized crime? What is the level of tax crime? Serious fraud in those entities. And look, in today's world, whereas Google is a great tool, but it's also not entirely reliable. So there needs to be a way for us to assess this. We're entirely, as a jurisdiction and as a country, I would assume, very much reliant on sort of very specific tools, whether it's WorldCheck or Acuity or whatever else is out there. But you also need people who are looking at it from a cutting edge perspective and scanning your database to do this. So having risk-based assessment relating to the geographies and countries with whom you are dealing with, whether it's you or your client dealing with, but for whom you are doing the compliance as a service provider, I think is absolutely critical in evaluating you know, the risk associated with your own client and for the jurisdiction. Probably, Owen, you could touch on how this is done in a more systematic manner, as opposed to, you know.
Actually, I was going to add to that the point that it's not about the day they arrive, right? So very often you do your onboarding, you say, yeah, this seems a good person and everything seems perfectly normal and legitimate. It's not about allowing them into the fortress on day one. It's about checking once they're inside with the CCTV that they're still behaving as you were expecting them to. So, you know, I think, yes, there's risk-based assessment doesn't just mean day one. Risk-based assessment means looking at what they're doing day to day, what transactions they're doing, if the transactions seem to relate to the risk profile that you came up originally when you were onboarding the customer or discussing their desires and needs. It relates to whether or not people appear in another list or there's adverse media appearing about them. It relates to geographies, and geographies go in and out, right? I remember a colleague of mine when I was in Reuters signing a deal with a bank in Iran 2 days before the UN imposed sanctions on the bank. You know, the poor soul, you know, lost his deal. But it's you know, these things change, and it's not just about monitoring on day one and having my best feel is that this person is low risk or medium risk or high risk. It's how does their risk profile change with time? And you might find that somebody comes in as somebody you believe is a high risk, and you look at what they're doing and the transactions and realize that actually a lot of what they're doing is actually good stuff, not bad stuff. You know, I think that the tendency with compliance is always to assume everybody is very bad and you need to monitor and check, and I don't disagree with that. But, you know, it doesn't mean that everybody is very bad. It's about catching the people who are causing risks to you as a business or risks to you as your customers.
And one thing, Owen, that's where the focus can shift, you know, in terms of the personnel working within these businesses.
Exactly.
Instead of verifying utility bills, verifying driver's license, passports, and all this, that's where the shift should be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic, folks. Really interesting insights. I want to open the floor a little bit for some questions. I'm sure you've been listening to us. And folks, please feel free to put your questions into chat. We're also going to open a question field on Mentimeter. Any questions based on what you've heard? We've touched on the cost of compliance, the risk of not complying, the potential cost of additional headcount, the primary onboarding compliance, but also the monitoring as it goes ahead. Let's get some questions from the audience. Anything that you might be struggling with at the moment that these folks who are seeped in this perspective can ask. Any questions before we start closing? We've got about 9 minutes left, so anybody with a question, please pop it into chat, or you can also use the Mentimeter function to ask any questions. While we're waiting for the questioning to come in, what does a kind of a ideal technology solution look like at the moment from this perspective? What are sort of the things that you'd like to see in there, Santosh and Owen?
I'm not sure I should answer that question, having spent 5 years of my life building what I always wished I'd had when I was doing the job. I think I should flip that because otherwise I just sound like I'm advertising, and Parmik is here to advertise on my. So I won't answer that. But if Santosh wants to say,
sure, absolutely. I think, look, the consensus that we've all been talking about, I think throughout today, and I'm sure the other attendees in this event also feel the same way, is we can't, as Owen mentioned, keep throwing bodies at this problem because it's never going to go away and it's never going to be the optimal solution. I think it's going to have to be we'll have to split this into an activity-based approach. The activity will be certain activities are absolutely and solely suited for humans. Certain activities are absolutely and solely suited for machines. And there is a interaction between these two categories where you need workflows. So the ideal process for me is a solution that allows me to create workflows, to leverage off the data mining, analysis, and refining capabilities. What I would ideally like is for the compliance team at the Apex to now walk in and look at a hits register that it has been very much scrubbed from negative or from any sort of irrelevant data into it, and focusing on the fact that yesterday someone was arrested and he has $10 million spread across 3 funds with us, and we need to figure out how to deal with this because it may be proceeds of crime, rather than walking in with 200 negative hits. The other thing that I would like to have is, well, look, COVID has been an eye-opener. If you look at onboarding, and again, I'm looking at top line here as someone running a company, is I can't tell my clients that, sorry, I absolutely cannot onboard a client of the client, which is an investor in his fund, because I don't have a certified utility bill in my hand. When the world has moved on to independence verifications on this point, I can't rely on a solution where you're telling me that, I think I find this whole practice of saying if a lawyer, attorney, accountant, or doctor certifies a document, it works. I think we've all seen that there are a few lawyers, accountants, doctors, and others out there that may be crooks as well. So it's not necessarily that these are you're not exactly getting a stamp of authenticity here, when you could just go to the data source. Is this a true passport? Well, look, we checked it against the passports issued by the government of Mauritius, and it is Santosh Gajedar's passport. It's much better than someone coming in and stating that it is Santosh Gajedar without ever meeting me in his life or her life. So I think it's human interaction, workflow, database mining, and refining capability to allow humans to work efficiently. And this is what we're looking for. Ultimately, it's not to replace compliance departments, irreplaceable. It's to make their work easier and to reduce to a point. I think Owen hit a very important point earlier, where you're seeing people in compliance working way more to capture the FTE requirements that are now in excess of what we have as capacity anywhere in any firm when it comes to compliance.
Low level routine work, I suppose, should be shifted onto robotic process automation, AI, and all these things. Then bring more value to the process and also enable the people.
And I'll throw something onto that point as well, which is, we all know the term "to err is human." Well, Google quantified the level of erring, which is that they did some AI work about 2 years ago in the UK, looking at the ability of a computer to spot cancer in an X-ray. And we had a little bit of a scandal about 10, 15 years ago when doctors were tired and were missing signs of cancer and people were dying. So the health service put in a double-blind process, and Google came out and said they're now better than 2 independently, highly motivated compliance officers checking. Doctors checking, because they had got to 97%. Now you think about that. That actually tells you if you've got 2 really highly motivated people checking something, they're only, they make an error every 3% or 1 in 30. Now, that's 2 people, and you tend not to have double blind on your compliance processes. So if you've got tired people doing compliance, they are missing things. And the level of error is probably around 1 in 20, not 1 in 30 if you just rely on one person. So actually making these guys do 50, 60 hours a week just to get through everything that they've got to do is counterproductive, because you're just upping the error rates.
So we got a couple of cool questions from the audience as we're running towards the end of the session. Why not create a global platform for KYC? And each country can enter the system and see it instead of compiling at individual countries. Is that a vision that is possible?
I would love that. And the biggest issue with the whole of that is that governments will not publish databases of passports. Right? The number 1 document we all have to rely on to identify somebody is their passport. To be honest, if there's a typo in your passport name in your passport is correct, not the one that you were given. Right? But until governments allow all of us to reach out to central repositories to go, is this Owen Hall? And we're always making a judgment.
One more question from the audience as we get to the last 2 minutes. Is this a big company issue that the big companies need to deal with while the others do whatever they like?
No, not at all. I think not at all. In fact, but it is because big companies are throwing a lot of bodies and money at it because the reputational risk is much higher, and I think people don't take it very seriously. But this is not. I think are others complying? It's at their own risk and peril. Forget the cost element, but as I said, this can lead to jail and individuals and at the peak of their careers. And this is not something that the enforcement needs to go up, and it has gone up in Mauritius. And I think nobody today takes this lightly. If they are, I'll be amazed. They're probably not in the right field, because if you look at the consequences of not taking this seriously, it's just unimaginable.
So, folks, we're getting to the end of the process. As always, we're ending with a quiz and a prize. Parmesh, what's the prize this week for the fastest gun in the, should we say, the East or the West?
It's a 1-hour presentation. It's a 1-hour support from you guys, from you, James.
All right, so we're going to ask a question. The first, please start registering for the poll. The first one with the correct answer wins a free 1-hour assessment, which we'll follow up. When you are ready, you can register already, get your name in the box on Mentimeter. And the first one to get us the correct answer will be the winner. We're going to give it a minute or two. We've got about 5-6 contestants already. If anyone else wants to join the quiz, please go for it. We had someone winning last time. The next presentation, which is in a week's time, I'm going to be taking, which is going to be the management skills that you need for remote management. We're going to talk about the superpowers of remote managers. I hope to see a lot of you in that session. It's going to be interactive, and we're going to learn about a whole lot of new things. I'd like to just thank Owen Santosh for a wonderful presentation today. Lots of depth of knowledge and lots of real nuggets. Thank you so much. And we look forward to hearing more from you. This recording will also be available, right, Parmesh, on our social media platforms?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right. So we got about 6 contestants. It's a very shy group today. Let's see what happens. Let's see who the winner is of this call. Thank you so much for joining us, Owen Santosh. and for your wisdom. To what extent can onboarding a client be reduced using DocStore? And let's see who is the winner. All right. What is the correct answer, gents? 70%, right? 70% reduction in the onboarding investment needed. And our winner today on the leaderboard, Devyani. Well done. Congratulations. Please get in touch with us afterwards. You were the fastest. You just beat Imran by a couple of seconds. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand back to Parmesh. I look forward to seeing you at the next session. And thank you so much for our guests for the time and the effort they've put in today.
Yeah. Thanks,
Thank
James.
you, everyone.
Thanks, Santosh and Owen. And it was really a wonderful moment together with you guys. Well, we look forward for the next session, and we will have James with us, and other people will intervene during the panel discussion. So thanks, everyone, and have a good day.
Thank you so much. See you at the next one. Thank you, Owen. Thank you, Santosh.
Thanks, James. Bye.
Thanks.